Today we are going to be hearing from a legislative panel of women. We're very, very excited to hear from them and hear about their experiences serving in the legislature and the kind of hoping that they can give all of us maybe a vision of how it's done, and hopefully for those of you that are interested, a vision on maybe how you could do it as well. So I have in front of me a set of questions that have been submitted by women when we registered for the conference, and I will share some of those. But first I'm going to go through and do a left to right introduction, my left to right. Senator Deirdre Henderson is a Republican member of the Utah State Senate. If you guys just want to raise your hands, I guess you've got the signs there. Representing District 7. She is a graduate of Brigham Young University. She and her husband Gabe have 5 children. She has extensive business experience and previously worked with former Utah Representative Jason Chaffetz. Let's see, Senator Luz Escamilla holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Business Marketing and a Master's degree in Public Administration from the University of Utah. On November 4th, 2008, she was elected to the Utah State Senate representing Senate District 1, becoming the first Latina elected in the Utah State Senate and the first immigrant elected in the Utah State Legislature. She is serving her 3rd term in the Senate after being reelected in 2012 and 2016. Senator Escamilla serves in the Senate leadership team as the Senate Minority Whip. Our 3rd participant is Representative Sandra Hollins. She was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, and has been a Salt Lake City resident for the past 27 years. She and her husband, David, currently reside in Fair Park and have 2 daughters, Janelle and Kenise. Is that Kenise? Representative Hollins is a licensed clinical social worker, and the primary focus of her career has been on substance abuse treatment and advocacy services for Salt Lake City's homeless population. Sandra received her bachelor's degree in business management from the University of Phoenix and her master's degree in social work from the University of Utah. As the first Black American woman elected to the Utah House of Representatives, Sandra proudly serves District 23. And last but not least, Representative Marcia Judkins. Marcia Judkins has been a resident of the Provo-Orem area for over 3 decades. She obtained a bachelor's degree in political science from BYU, a master's degree in public administration also from BYU, and currently serves in the Utah House of Representatives, representing House District 61. In her private life, she is the mother to 7 children, although if you have 7 children, your life is never very private. Mother-in-law to 5, and May, grandma, this cuts off, to 12. She also currently teaches at UVU as an adjunct professor of developmental math. Representative Judkins has always been civically and politically engaged, having served on a number of boards and in various volunteer positions with organizations such as the United Way, CHADS, School Community Councils, Provo School Board, and the Utah Republican Party. All right, I am going to try to ask some questions and get out of the way. I've got a lot of good questions in front of me, but would you guys like to raise your hands if you would like me to leave some time for you to also ask questions? Do you have things? Okay, I'll try to make sure that we leave some time at the end for real-time questions that allow you to kind of follow up on things that they've asked. I got a lot of questions online, and I kind of have grouped them in the interest of kind of keeping the flow of conversation going. And the first set of questions that I kind of want to focus on are questions that relate to how they got involved in politics to begin with. And I thought that we would start, we've had a little bit of bios, but I would love it if we gave each of them just a few minutes, 4 minutes, to tell each of us, and we'll go down the row, what inspired you to do this, how you got involved. Was it a response to a definitive thing or just a general desire to serve? So we'll just let you go. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I've got to set the record straight on one thing in the introduction, though. I am not a graduate of BYU yet. So it's been a source of, I want to say shame. I don't have a bachelor's degree. And when I first got into politics, everybody was talking about the problem of Utah women not getting their bachelor's, not finishing college, and what a terrible problem this was. And I always wanted to just shrink in my chair because I was part of that problem. And really embarrassed by it, frankly. I got married, this is my husband, Gabe, and we got married young. I was after my freshman year here at BYU. And then I had 5 babies in 8 years, and always thought that I would go back to school when my youngest was started school, and that's when I got involved in politics. But I have been working on it throughout the years, mostly independent study, a class here and there. It's really hard when you're in the legislature to go to school full-time, but I am starting spring term next month, full-time. So I'm working on it. But in 2008, or the fall, I guess, of 2007, my youngest started preschool. I have 5 children. And I was really feeling lost. Like, what do I do now? I don't want to just scrapbook all the time. That was how I was spending a lot of my time back then. I did design and sew competition figure skating costumes for people and did things like that, but I was really wanting to get involved in government and in politics, and I had absolutely no idea how to do that. And then I met someone who was running for Congress. I met Jason Chaffetz, who was running for Congress against Congressman Chris Stewart back in 2008. I met him in January of 2008. And I liked what he had to say. I liked him. And he needed volunteers. He didn't have any money to pay anybody. So he was just getting free work out of people. And so I volunteered to make some phone calls, and one thing led to another, and I became his political director that year and worked really hard. I ended up working full-time that year for free, more than full-time. I had no idea. I always say, you know, if I would have known at the beginning of that year, if I'd have known in January 2008 how much blood, sweat, and tears and time it would have taken to do what I did that year, I never would have done it. So I'm really, really glad I didn't know, because I'm so glad that I got those experiences that year, because that helped prepare me for what came next and really opened a lot of doors for me. So I ended up working for Congressman Chaffetz for the next several years. I ran his political operation really essentially out of my laundry room in Spanish Fork. And then in 2012, due to redistricting, there was an open Senate seat in the south part of Utah County. And I thought, I'm going to run for that. And if I hadn't have had those experiences before then, I would have never felt even close to being prepared to run for something like that. So it was a really a good experience, a lot of hard work, overcame a lot of fears and insecurities, and I'm really glad that I took that step.
Hello? Oh, there. Nice mic. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Luz Escamilla, and I'm here. First of all, I'll disclose I do have a 4-year-old with me, one of my kids. So if you see someone going crazy, that will be my kid. And I'm a working mom, so that's why I got involved. And I've been involved since college. I went to the University of Utah and started really seeing disparities and gaps, especially education. The idea that someone's zip code, where they were raised and where they live, was really just changing the conversation about their outcomes and what to expect about their life was heartbreaking for me. I'm an immigrant, so both of my parents are engineers. My mom has a PhD in chemical engineering in Mexico. So I grew up maybe in a very different way of thinking about education, where that was a given at home. I mean, that's what was expected. But my dad had a vision of the American dream, and he worked really hard. They sold their properties so that my brother and I could come to school here. My brother actually graduated from Brigham Young University, so we had both covered at home. I think my dad just passed away not that long ago, very young, and I think he really, really liked BYU. So I think I started getting very involved, and when I started working politics, now I had a chance to work for Governor Huntsman. So I was a Republican governor. I was asked to be his director for the State Office of Ethnic Affairs, and that was a great experience. I was very young, right after getting my MPA, and my now 14-year-old, I was pregnant while doing my MPA, and that was hard. I literally finished my program 3 days before I gave birth to her, and when I was asked to do this work as director of this office, so this is in the executive branch, I thought, what am I going to do this with a baby, a newborn baby? Everyone in my family lived abroad, in a different country, and I felt very lonely, but I felt I needed to do it for her. It was a very difficult decision. I had at that time I didn't have a lot of resources, so we didn't have a lot of vacation time. I needed to work a lot. So I felt this was an opportunity also for my family. So we made that decision to go and work. It was a lot of hours. I think what you're going to see of commonalities here is it's you have to, in politics, especially as a woman, you have to sweat it. And just to get the respect, especially from men, you have to work 3 times as hard. And I know this is you probably hear it in every career, in every industry. And this is part of, we talk about the ceiling, the glass ceiling, but man, in politics it's tough. And you have to create this really thick skin. And I start working very, very hard. It's sometimes difficult. You have your children, and it's hard. But what comes out of this is, and I think they get to appreciate as they get older, and I'm sure some of my colleagues here with their children being a little bit older have probably seen that, right? That when they say thank you, my teenagers, which teenagers are toddlers just with a phone and a lot of more vocabulary, when there's these moments when she said, well, thanks for what you've done, Mom. I mean, it's been great to see you working hard. And sometimes I think they don't see that, but they do. So really quick, I was in a meeting as a state director for the Office of Ethnic Affairs. Information was requested by the legislature, and keep in mind, prior to me working with the governor, I was an advocate for low-income issues. So I've been at the legislature as an advocate. We had to register a lobbyist, but we were advocating for low-income poverty issues, so ending poverty in healthcare. So I've been interacting with the legislature now in this capacity. I was asked to bring information, and we were at this committee. It was the education committee, and some of my colleagues are still there, not many, of that specific committee. So this is 2007, and I'm sitting there, and it was an interim. So this is during the summer, because we meet during the summer, and that's when you get to speak at length of issues. I mean, there's more time to address issues, and they were trying to figure out the cost of educating undocumented children. So they requested our office with the State Office of Education to work with the census and try to get estimates. We worked hard, we got some numbers, and the numbers were pretty low, less than 0.5% of our public education budget was allocated for children that didn't have an immigration status. While we're sitting there, we presented. Now that I'm a legislator, I know what's happening, but at that time I couldn't see it, but someone signaled another legislator, and it was all senators, by the way, and this that were doing most of the talk. The House members were very quiet, and one of the senators asked, that was not the chair, asked, well, now we want to know the cost of educating anchor babies. And I remember being shocked to hear that word, that derogatory term, and no one said anything. And it was painful. I'm like, is someone going to say something? I mean, this is even unconstitutional. These children are U.S. citizen-born children. And I knew I had a lot of interaction, especially with Democrats, and I waited for the end of the meeting, and I remember going to the restroom and crying, and it was hurtful. And coming back, and I saw some of them, and I'm like, especially the ones that are attorneys, I'm like, did you miss that class of the Constitution and your constitutional law class, or what? It's called the 14th Amendment. So anyways, they're like, well, Luz, it's not my constituency. And I remember hearing that more than once, and that was it for me. That was that moment where I'm like, if U.S. citizen children are not your constituency, or any child for that matter, then there's something wrong. But then I couldn't complain. I'm like, I need to do something. So that's what triggered me running for office, against everything. I had to unseat a senator, go against a very good candidate that's a good friend of mine, actually is my state president. And that was interesting. And so it was just this interesting dilemma, being 29. So I became the youngest senator elected. Yeah, so that was interesting, to say the least. We worked really hard. So that was what really triggered, but it was there's an accumulation of work. I mean, this just doesn't happen overnight. You just don't wake one morning and it's like, oh, I think I'm going to run for office. It takes time. And the thing is, if I would have waited for someone to ask me for run for office, I probably would have never done it. I mean, I would still probably be waiting. So for me, it was really that moment where it was this aha moment, and it was very hurtful. I was angry and sad, but I couldn't complain anymore. It really got to the point where, like, well, then what do I do now? And it was like, maybe I need to be there. Maybe that voice needs to be represented, and that's what I did. Thank you.
Hello. So I was a lot like Senator Henderson. I married very young. I met my husband and I. In fact, my husband and I are celebrating our 28th wedding anniversary today. Oh, he's in the back. And so we're spending part of the day here with you, and the other part with the storm that came through last week, this week, it knocked down a tree in our backyard, so we're going to be trying to restore power to our neighbors. We still have power, but our neighbors don't have power as a result of our tree. And so that's what we're going to be doing this evening. Great 28th anniversary. So I moved here. My husband and I, we married and we moved here as a result of his job working for the Forest Service. And when we got here, I didn't complete college, but when we moved here, and so we moved here, and he was working, and I got a job, and then I started having my girls. I have 2 girls. They're both grown now. But after I gave birth to them, I decided I wanted to go back to college, and so I did. Pretty much it was because I had someone in my life, this woman I worked with, who said to me when I started talking about the possibility of going back to college, she said, you don't need to be going back to school. You have a husband that has a job, he has a degree, and you have 2 kids at home. You have no business being in college. I took it as a challenge. I took it as a challenge, and I went back to school and completed my bachelor's degree because my mindset was, how dare you tell me what I cannot do? And so I went back to school, started working for the Bureau of Land Management. I was in human resource, was going up the ladder pretty fast, but wasn't happy. Didn't like what I was doing, saw it as just pushing papers and didn't like it at all. And so I came home one day and told my husband I'm going back to school to work on my master's degree in social work, and he was like, well, okay. And so, but he supported it. At the time, during this time, my daughters were, I believe, in junior high school. And so quit that job, went back to school, found another job, working more in the social work field. And when I look back on that time, I think something must have been wrong with me, because I was going to school, I was working a full-time job, plus doing my internship, plus raising my girls, plus I had a husband that traveled. His job would take him out of town quite often during that time. And so when I look back on it, I think, wow, what was I thinking? But I just knew it was something I wanted to do. And so was doing all of this and working. But it was during that time that I had always been active in my community. Anything that was going on, I was there and wanted to know, was active in my daughter's school, and was always calling my Utah State representative at that time. Anytime something was going on with the community, I was contacting her saying, hey, are you aware that this is going on? I need to know what's happening with this. So one day she called me in and asked, can we go out to lunch? And I said, well, yeah, that's fine, thinking we're gonna talk some things that's going on in the community. And she said, have you ever thought about running for office? And I laughed at her. I said, you're out of your mind. I am not running for office. I have my 2 daughters. They're in school, and I'm trying to make sure they get out of school. And of course, we all know that's probably, every woman in here, that's probably would be our reaction, to make sure our house is secure first and our children are taken care of first. And so that was my response. And she said, okay, just something, I just want to put it in your mind, something to think about. You know, she said, I noticed the way how you're always involved in the community, and I noticed how you interact in the community, and I noticed how the community responds to you. And I think you would be good in politics. And I said, well, okay, I'll think about it. But, you know, like I said, I have my daughters. I have too much on my plate, and I don't want that on my plate. Well, when she got ready to retire, she called me and she said, your daughters are now in college. You're out of college. What's your excuse now? And I said, well, I don't have one. Really don't have a reason why I shouldn't run for office. And so I ended up calling some of my friends together, some of my best girlfriends, and called them to dinner over at my house one night. And I said, okay, guys, this is what's going on. Tell me what you think. They sat around and discussed it. At the end of the night, they took a vote, and they decided that I was going to be running for office. And so that's how I got into politics. But also when I started thinking about, on a broader sense, the impact that I can have, because a lot of the issues that are important to me are centered around those in poverty, those who are homeless, those who are marginalized. When I started thinking about that voice and whether they had a voice at the table and how I can bring their voice to the table, it became more appealing. And I started thinking, this is where I need to be, this is where I want to be. And so in 2014, I ran for office and I was elected. In 2015 is when I was sworn in. And I have to tell you, I love it. I love working in politics. I love my constituents and I love my job. I love what I do. In full-time, I work for the city of Salt Lake City. I'm their homeless strategist and outreach coordinator. And I can't say anything else, but I love what I do. When you feel this passion, when you love getting up in the morning and going to your job and you feel this passion and at the end of the day you feel good about what you've done, I think you're in the right place. And I always tell my constituents, when I get to the point where I'm not feeling that passion anymore for politics, then it's time for me to set aside. I think they deserve that. And find somebody else to take my place who have that passion that passion for making sure that their vote counts and that they're taken care of in the Utah House of Representatives.
I just respect these women so much. It's been a pleasure to serve with them. I'm the newest one. I was just elected this last November. And I think we all have a little bit of commonality here. Or at least a few of us. I also got married very young, and I always felt driven to go to school, though I always just wanted to go to college, and I started having babies right away. But I was majoring in math at the time, but I kept having babies in semesters, and I know, I was really dumb. It's embarrassing. There is such a thing as birth control. But anyway, so that's all kind of embarrassing. But I couldn't keep up the math major part of it. It was too hard to skip semesters and try to come back. And so I just looked for the shortest major, and there was economics and political science. And I thought, well, I don't know what economics is, but political science sounds like something I know what that is. So I did political science, and I actually really, really loved it. So then, and I graduated with I had 5 kids at that point, and my 5th baby was 1 year old. And then I had 2 more kids. I was a stay-at-home mom. And I have about 4 or 5 kids that really had a difficult time in school. They have various diagnoses that make it difficult for them. And so trying to work with their teachers and with the districts to get accommodations and different, it was often a very frustrating experience, and I felt that that I wasn't being heard, and that there were other parents who felt like I did, and I was always involved in the schools. I love the teachers, and I would listen to them sometimes, feel like they maybe weren't being heard on a district level. And so I just thought, well, I want to run for the school board. And I wanted to do it right and be educated in that. And so that's when I went back to school and got my master's in public administration. And then I ran for the school board and spent 4 years on the board. And it was such a fantastic experience. I really enjoyed it. And I realized that where the real power was the legislative level. They're always telling us what to do, how much money we could have. And so I only served 4 years on the school board and decided I was done then. I just felt like I was done. And I hadn't decided to run for anything. And I feel the same. If I had sat around and waited for somebody to come ask me to run, because people would say that when I was running. So who talked to you? Who asked you to run? And I felt kind of dumb saying, well, nobody. I just decided I was going to run, you know. But I hate, as women, I don't know that we're often asked to run. We're not thought of as people who are going to run. So we have to kind of decide that. And I got elected, so that was really nice. Campaigning was not my favorite. It's hard, and I don't know if it's different for men and women or if it's just people in general, but to go up to somebody and say, I'm a good candidate, and here's why. Let me tell you all the positive things about myself and how I'm so great. And I love people. I love knocking on the doors and talking to people, but when they would say, well, why should I vote for you? It's hard to sell yourself sometimes, and that's something we have to get over. That I still haven't quite got over it yet. I don't know, but I love being on the legislature. It was so much more busy than I ever thought, and I cannot believe, you know, people do it with like real jobs and kids at home. My youngest is 21. And I teach at UVU and took the semester off. I mean, how hard is that? But there's people who work so hard while they're there. And I feel like I worked really hard, but I didn't have to juggle kids and other jobs. And so, anyway, I guess that's my story.
Okay, I think the way that we are going to do this is I will address a question to one of you, and we'll rotate through. But if any of the other three of you feel like there's something specific you want to add to that, when she's done speaking, do that, and then we'll move on to the next question. So I thought we would start with Representative Hollis. I am really interested, and I think I'm particularly interested in this because of your career choice. I'm wondering if you feel that there are any unique experiences or perspectives that women bring to governance because they often choose different kinds of careers, maybe than men do, or just generally what unique perspectives you think there are that women bring to governance.
Absolutely. I think we bring a unique perspective. You know, in every form of government or every issue, women are involved. Every issue is our issue, whether we're talking about the economy, you know, whether we're talking about education, no matter what, it is our issue. And I think as women, we bring that perspective of how it's affecting us. You know, when we're talking about the economy, you know, we all know the statistics around how much women make in the economy. And I think it's up to us, and we have been the ones that have highlighted and have looked at it and said, okay, yeah, this is going on, but let me tell you how this is affecting us as women. You know, and when it comes down to education and looking at the number of women who are in the educational system or who are in the college system, we bring that perspective and be able to talk and push to make sure that our challenges are addressed or our issues are addressed. You know, even when it comes down to things like breastfeeding in the community, we bring that perspective. And I think most importantly, with women being in government and women being in the political system, I think in order for us to get more women in this career, our girls, our young girls, has got to see us up there. They've got to be able to see themselves in us because then they don't know they can do it. And I can tell you, even with me being in office, I've had a number of young African and African-American girls who have come to me and said, I want to be in politics. I think I can do politics. And I know it's because they see me doing it, and now they see that that glass ceiling has been broken, and they think of themselves, and they see themselves in me. And so it is important as women that we are in that space, and that our young girls see us so we can start training the next leaders that's going to take over our positions one day.
So I want to interject on this one. During this last legislative session, I found out that Luz and I are in the Senate, And we found a little bit of history. This microphone does not like me.
Oh, there we go now. So you set it on, so you can do it now.
So,
There. Then use mine. Or maybe
Okay.
we can turn this on.
found out that in the state history, so we've been a state for 123 years, there's only been 29 women elected to the Utah State Senate. 29 in 123 years. Now, Luz is a Democrat, and Democrats do a lot better at this than the Republicans. I mean, it's shameful. It's really, really terrible that my party is so bad at this. My party is really good at saying it doesn't matter. It's policy is policy. It doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference if you're. I'm telling you, it does make a difference. It absolutely makes a difference. We have a different life experience. We have a different perspective. Things affect us differently. I remember the very first meeting that I went to with a bunch of senators, and they were talking about restoring the sales tax on food. And I had just gone through freshman training, and in freshman training they said, now listen, don't talk. You guys keep your mouth shut and just listen and don't spout off. They're telling all the freshmen, you've been spouting off on the campaign trail. Now it's time for you to sit down and be quiet and listen, which is actually really good advice, not bad advice. But I was terrified as one of two women in the room. When I was elected, there was only one other Republican woman in the room, and frankly, she didn't like other women all that much. And so it was kind of a hostile environment in some ways. And so I'm sitting at the table, and they're talking about putting food tax, raising the food tax, and I'm sitting there going, okay, I'm looking around this table at these men who are all very wealthy, who have their own businesses. They have no idea what it's like to go grocery shopping with a calculator. No clue. And so finally, I'm thinking, I got to keep my mouth shut. They told me I have to keep my mouth shut, but finally I'm like, okay, I have to say something. And so I gave them my perspective about how, if you're going grocery shopping for your kids, and you have a calculator, and you're adding the food up as you go, an increase, even a small increase in the sales tax on food means I put less food in my basket for my kids. It's a real impact. And it's something that not a lot of the people at that table gave much thought to, if any. And at least that year, I single-handedly kept that part out of the bill that was being discussed. And I've been fighting that issue ever since. And it's getting hard every year. I've been fighting that issue. And I was made chair of the Revenue and Taxation Committee when I was first elected. And in the Senate, when you're in the majority party in the Senate, you're given a chairmanship, even the newbies. And it's both wonderful and terrifying at the same time. And I was the only woman on the committee, and I was there with tax professionals. One of the senators was a tax attorney, one was the president of the Utah Taxpayers Association, another one was an accountant, and I'm sitting there as a freshman having to chair this committee, and so I had to do my homework. I had to do a lot of research and homework and read the tax code, and I had mock committee hearings, and I think I outworked all of the men, probably all of them in the Senate who had ever come and been a chair, because they just, wing it. But I felt like I had to know my stuff and prove myself and understand the legislative rules and understand how to do things. And in fact, a colleague of mine just last year who served with me for 7 years said, you were so good at chairing committees when you first started. I mean, you're just a natural. And I'm like, are you kidding? I am not a natural. I worked really hard to be good at that. So anyway, I think that it's very important we do bring a different perspective to the table as women.
Okay, perfect. This question is for Senator Escamilla. I'm really fascinated by the part of your story. You obviously came to this very prepared from both an education background, and then your work led you to be well-trained and well-versed. A lot of women who go into politics don't have the luxury of having sort of the institutional, educational background that you had. So I'm just curious from your perspective now on both sides, both as someone doing this not sort of professionally, right, approaching legislatures, and then someone being in the legislature. What do you feel like is the most important way for us as individuals to influence representatives and senators? How can we do that just as citizens and constituents? How can we communicate with people like you without necessarily the professional credentials that you had?
So first I'll say do your homework. So it has to do a lot with what Senator Henderson just mentioned. So legislators are generalists. we may have areas of expertise based on our background, where we work, or educational background, but we're seeing, we're addressing every single issue related to state government. So we're generalists, and we look at 1,500 bills, we pass about 600 a session, and we have to balance a budget. All it in 45 days, while still being mothers, fathers, whatever else we have to do at the same time. So if you are respectful, and you build relationships with legislators, those pay off at the end. So what does that mean? One, maybe first is you may want to consider connecting with your legislators and getting to know them, regardless of where you stand on issues and where they stand. Just get to know them, because at the end of the day, they are your elected representatives. And do it not during the session, because at that time it's really hard for me to stop and even have a 5-minute conversation. Sometimes I don't even have a chance to go to the restroom. So, because we're going meeting after meeting, we're at the legislature from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. sometimes. I mean, those are my days during the session, especially if you're in leadership. It just keeps adding. So get to know your legislator during interim, after session. And if it has to be like maybe 10, 15 minutes just to introduce yourself and what are the issues that you care. Actually, your legislators do remember those constituents that introduce themselves and respectfully say, this is my concern, and I'm just educating my elected officials about issues that matter to me. One. Now, if there's an issue that truly, that's out there because of a bill, don't feel shy to connect with them. The best way to connect, if it's going to be email or text, phone calls are hard, because it's hard to return a call if you're in meetings, but it's simple to return a text, or an email is better. Sometimes it's easier. Just make sure you say, I'm your constituent and I live in, this is my address. That makes a big difference. We're getting 1,000 emails a day. I'm gonna always go first to my constituents. They're the ones that elect me. They're the ones that I represent. So I owe them first. And I try to respond to others, but priorities are priorities, especially when it goes so fast. The other one is, so let's say you're interacting, you see them, whether it's in an elevator, we're all regular people, we're normal people, we're a constituent, a citizen legislature, meaning we're as average. We're not, career politicians. Maybe California has a little bit of a different setup. We get paid about between $15,000 a year to $18,000, give or take. So really, we're not living out of being legislators. We actually get pay cuts, for serving. We do it out of love, not because we're making money out of this. So, if you see them and you want to talk, just say, hey, there's an issue, or I have a concern about this bill. And if that legislator starts engaging, and sometimes you just don't engage because you don't know anything. I have people say, well, vote no on HB 27, and I'm thinking, HB 27 out of 1,000 bills, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm sorry. So if you say, really I have concerns about HB 27, amendments to adoption provisions, because that's one I just run. It was signed by the governor on Friday. Thank you very much. So just say that, and just like, I have a concern about adoption, HB 27, adoption provisions, that the sponsor is Senator Henderson. Then there's like, okay, well, it wouldn't be her, because it has to be a House bill, so Representative Hollins. Then I'm like, okay, so one, it's a House bill. It's probably not yet in the Senate, so I will say, I'm sorry, I haven't heard of the bill, but if it's coming my way, I'll keep an eye. What are the concerns that you have? Usually that's what happens, and you say, well, my concerns are this. Okay, if I ask you a question and you don't have the answer, so here's the key, and this is probably the most important thing with the legislator. If you lie to me, I'm never going to trust you again. So if you don't have an answer, which is valid, because I don't have 3/4 of the time, I won't have an answer for you. But I'll tell you, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer, but I'll get back to you. If you tell me the same, I'll respect you more than anything. There's nothing worse than I'm interacting with a constituent and he or she lies to me, and I take those words like for real, and I go and take it somewhere else, and they're like, oh, you're completely wrong. And sometimes people do it because they don't want to look like they don't have an answer. So I would say, be respectful. Please know that if you don't have an answer, just say, I don't have an answer, and I'll get back to you, and I'll be like, oh, thank you. That means a lot. Source it helps if you have a source. And the other one is, because we're superhumans and we have a lot of flaws, you may catch us in a bad moment, and I'm sorry if that's the case. Yeah, we're not mean people. We're just sometimes, probably they just killed my bill when I was walking out of that room, and I'm probably either crying or angry. And that happens all the time, right? Like, they literally kill your bill. They just work a year or two. and people are like trying to talk to you about something else, and you may not be in the best situation. So just that humanity, I think, helps to know that, like, you may be coming here with an issue that's really important to you. I may be also coming out with work of 2 years. I just got killed by my colleagues in a committee. So that being that human, I think, is what will be very helpful as you approach a legislator and effectively build a relationship.
Okay, perfect. These are great answers. Okay, these questions are for Representative Judkins and Senator Henderson. And let's start with you. I'm curious, coming at this from a perspective of a legislature that is not evenly balanced necessarily, right? There's a weight, and so you're so you're from the majority party. You're from the majority party, which means you sort of operate from a position of strength. We have women that ask, is contacting you even a good use of my time if I feel like I live in a state where the power is unbalanced, right? And I know that I already disagree with what the party in power is doing. So what would you respond to a woman that she feels deflated just because she already knows that the people in power, she disagrees with them? How does she best communicate that, and is it worth it to communicate that?
I think it's always worth it to communicate. If you look at the voting patterns in the House, I don't follow the Senate, so I don't know, but there are very few bills, I feel like, that there aren't crossover. You know, it's not like we always just vote in this, sometimes we do, always vote in this block and that block. And and I can only speak for myself, but I try not to look at the board when I vote, before I vote, because I want to make my vote. And it can be tempting to sway from that when you see that, you know, all of these people are voting one way. And so I would hope that you would always think that any of us, or your representative, whoever your representative or senator is, that they would want to hear what you have to say. And another thing is that I have found that I really appreciate it when people call me on a vote and say, hey, I didn't agree with that vote. Why did you vote that way? Because I want to be accountable to my constituents, and I want to be able to explain how I feel about the issue and maybe why. And sometimes, believe it or not, the press isn't always accurate about how they're reporting what you're voting on. And so it might be that you might change your mind after listening to another side. And also the bills, as anyone can tell you, the bill as it's presented the first time is almost always very different, especially if it's a controversial bill, as to how it's gonna end up. And so things change, and the final iteration of that bill might be something that you could support or not, you know, either way. But I like to hear from people who agree with me, and especially from people who don't agree with me, because that's where I really can learn. So.
Thank you. I agree with that. One of the things I learned early on when I got to the legislature was that I was surprised at how, I don't know, nonpartisan most of the bills are, how bipartisan they are. I mean, they're just probably 95 or higher % of what we do is bipartisan. It's, you know, there may be little controversial pieces here and there that, as Representative Judkins says, can get stripped out of things. So a bill that you opposed maybe in committee, by the time it gets to the floor and is amended or substituted, it might be something that you like. Also, we are a citizen legislature. We don't know everything. And so it's really helpful to hear from people who have a different perspective, because we only know what we know, and we know we don't know everything. There might be some legislators who think they know everything, but they're wrong. And so I can't tell you how many times someone has reached out to me to give me their perspective, even on something that maybe is completely different than what maybe they assume that I think, or how I've voted on in the past, and it's changed my mind. It's changed my perspective. It doesn't always work that way, but it is good to have that information and to help explain to someone why you vote one way or the other also. I always want to hear from my constituents, especially, and I say this in my newsletters, especially when you disagree with me. I want to hear those perspectives. We do the best we can. in the legislature, but we aren't perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and we do make mistakes at times. But the good news is there's always next year to go and fix the mistakes from the year before. And that happens a lot. That's why we have 1,200 bills every session, is because most of them are just kind of fixing little problems, we call them cleanup bills, fixing little issues with the bills from the year before. And so, yes, I think it is absolutely in a respectful way, as Senator Escamilla pointed out, to build those relationships, especially if you are a constituent. And as she said, I'm a constituent there, and don't copy the entire legislature. Don't CC the entire legislature, because then we just kind of delete them and we think, it's not really for us, it's for other people. So.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so these are for my women who sit with the party not in power. I'm curious, maybe we can start with... we'll start with Representative Hollis, and I'd love to hear from both of you. I'm wondering if you can maybe share an experience or a time when you felt like, in spite of not being kind of the ruling party, you were able, through bipartisanship, to accomplish something meaningful, like by learning to work across the table. Are there pieces of legislation, even if you're not in control of the legislation, ways you were able to impact the legislation in positive ways, and how you as women work to foster bipartisanship? So either of those, that would be great.
Sure. As I try to think about a bill that kind of was across party lines that everybody had to come to the table, it would be my SB 460, and some of you may have read about this in the news recently. It was one of my biggest concerns has been the school to prison pipeline and the number of young people who are funneling through school straight into our prison system. And so I did a piece of legislation in 2016 around making sure that our student resource officers were trained in the school system, especially when they were having contact with the students in the school, the students and the SROs in the school system, and making sure that they were called in when the law was being broken and not when for behavioral issues. And so when I worked on that bill, I had to bring a lot of people to the table. I brought the community advocate to the table, who was interested in this, the ACLU, Chief of Police, and Republican Party, and the NAACP. All of us were at the table working, trying to come up with something, and I'm not talking about one time. We may have gone to the table 4, 5, 6 times, and going back and forth and saying, well, I like this, and well, I don't like this, and then they said, well, we don't like this, but we like this. And finally, in the end, we were able to come up with a bill that we can all agree upon that was going to have the most positive impact on our students in this state. And so when we're working those bills, believe it or not, behind the scenes, we do pretty well with working with each other. And I know there's a perception out there that we are always fighting somehow, but actually that's not true.
That's Congress.
That's Congress, that's not us. That's Washington.
That's Congress.
We actually all work quite well together, and a lot of behind-the-scene discussion goes on, and a lot of educating goes on. And I have found that it's been my experience when I take my concern to one of my colleagues and say, hey, I have to tell you that I really didn't agree with this, or when you said this on the floor, and they say, okay, well, let's talk about it, and we'll talk about it. And in the end, we may not agree with each other. And they'll tell me, I had one of my colleagues, this was so funny, he said, Representative Hollins, you make some of the best speeches. I don't agree with you, and I vote no after you finish talking, but, but I love your speeches, and you make some good points. And so I think, a lot of times I think it's a lot of work that goes on behind the scene, a lot of educating, not only on our part, but a lot of us learning. I have learned some things and why people think the way they think, and why they feel passionate about what they feel passionate about. So a lot of it is listening and being willing to listen to the other side. Did you want to add?
So I would say this. I think 95% of all, if not more, probably, of my bills have a Republican sponsor in the House. That's part of the strategy. So we will not pass any of our bills if we don't get support of the majority party. I mean, we just do the math. We need 38 votes in the House, 15 in the Senate, and a signature by the governor. So, I mean, we're not dummies. We know how to count. Yeah, I mean, that's just math, simple math. Not like the type of math that the good representative teaches at UVU. But so one thing I've learned is these are my friends. They've become your family. I mean, I want you guys to keep in mind how many hours we spent together. We know their families. We know each other's families, their children. We go to each other's, when there's funerals, when there are weddings of our kids or our own weddings. I was proposed on the Senate floor and got married, had 2 kids in the last 3 years while serving the Senate. So one of them is sleeping right now. That's why she's quiet. So, I mean, we end up becoming family. I mean, it's our family. So, the House is a little bit different. They're more chaotic. There's 75 of them. The Senate were 29. We do they make fun of us for being so slow and old. But it's just, to me, it's more, there's like this, there's a sense of more like a statesman and stateswoman, and it's more family. So we build relationships. I think everything we do in the legislature is about relationships. Even I think for them that have the majority, they still have to have their own votes in their own caucus. With that said, sometimes we have to then sometimes push hard on some issues. So I mean, budget-wise, it's hard to have the visibility or not to be left behind. I mean, some of these conversations, and we talk about like behind doors meetings, right? Or the minority was not included. I mean, please, when we call them on it, we usually already try to have a conversation. Just keep in mind, try to not only balance the budget or even talk about legislation. By the time you put a bill in front of people and it's public, people say, well, we should be involved in this whole process. And I'm like, I welcome you to be involved in the process. It's not that. It's not that we're sometimes trying to stop transparency. And I'm not saying there's no transparency issues. There are some transparency issues. But this is a pretty odd process. And if you have thousands of words in a piece of legislation that have some legal implications, as you're drafting this, you want to draft something and put something public that would not embarrass you if your name is attached to it. So sometimes it takes forever. It literally feels like a pregnancy, right? So I will say, out of issues that have been very important to me, I had to really work hard. Immigration was one, and we've done it. And for example, that was my bill. It took me 9 months to draft a bill, and I have to literally hand it to the majority party for them to take it, because I was not going to be able to. I mean, it was clear to me, the message that a Democrat was not going to carry this bill. But it didn't matter to me what mattered, and I was at the table in those conversations, but it was not my bill anymore. And that's okay. I mean, it was not easy, but for me, it was more important to have the policy, because the policy is, at the end of the day, is what you want, is to move forward. But I'll just add something, because I think this is even more valuable as we're having this conversation about women. I mean, this senator, she's my friend, and I love her. And we have to fight together. And it doesn't matter that we're Republicans or Democrats to get the respect we deserve as women. So we sometimes laugh and make jokes out of things, but it's been hard, because it comes both ways. We, and I say we now, the minority party, as women in the minority party, we're 4 of us now, versus 2 in the majority, but we see how they treat sometimes our female colleagues on the other side, and that's not okay. So we stand together with them, and vice versa. We sometimes get the support of our female colleagues on the Republican side saying, hey, that's not okay. And it goes everything from minor jokes that are sometimes inappropriate, I think, that are not ill intent, by the way, because these come from people that we know, and they're like, we're friends, but they will say something that is a little bit derogatory towards women, the way we dress, whether we elevated our voice. So it's not okay for us to elevate our voice or to question them, the authority, but it's okay for them to elevate their voice and for them to question our authority. So what I've learned throughout this time is I have great colleagues and friends on the other side of the aisle, but with Deidre, for example, with Senator Henderson, I can go to her and be like, hey, I need to decompress. I need to debrief and tell you what's going on. I want your feedback. And sometimes I may be a little bit more paranoid, and she's like, no, I don't think that's what it is, Luz, it's gonna be fine. And it is fine. And sometimes she's like, you're right. something needs to happen. And I'm sure it happens on the other side of, with the House, just because with us, we're so close and we're spending most of our time. I mean, since we don't see the House a lot, I mean, in the middle of session, it just goes so fast. So what I've learned is we find allies, and for us, it's been great, like this last couple of years, to see her fight her own leadership fight, because she's very smart, of course, as you can see, and very eloquent. She's also just, it's been great to have a colleague like her. It's like, for Republican women, you guys have to feel proud of someone like her. But at the same time, we want to make sure her abilities are being respected, regardless of her gender. And sometimes that doesn't happen. I mean, Utah's tough. So we're proud to stand sometimes with her and be like, no, we want her. She should be the one chairing that committee or chairing that task force. Even though it's not going to be a Democrat chairing that committee or the task force, it's important for her to be there. So I've got to appreciate that, building those relationships. And issues could be anything. I mean, I just carried the whole medical cannabis bill this year, right? What? It's been interesting. It was I call it the Christmas tree bill, because it had more ornaments than anything else. It started with like 20 pages, we ended up like 100 pages. So I mean, that's a tough bill. It had a lot of people at the table, and you have to bring everyone, and that includes just lobbyists and so forth. I did the public vision screening to have, a freshman House member. It was great for her to take interest and say, I want to help, Senator. Hi, I don't know you, but I want to help. And just to have someone from the other side of the aisle saying, I want to help on something this important. It was a public vision screening for children. And she's like, there is a personal connection to her. And it made sense. I'm like, oh, I'm so glad we have someone like her that could speak on this issue from a personal connection. So we work on some other issues together. A lot of women in the Economy Commission bring issues of postpartum depression. I mean, who talks about postpartum depression? But when you have all of us together, right now we're 4 of us, and we were Senator Henderson, myself, and 2 other legislators. One of them was here, former Representative Edwards was your speaker. We used to chair together at this commission. And one day we stayed after the meeting, and we're all crying, talking about our experience after having babies, and how some of us face some type of, I would not call it postpartum depression, it could be baby blues, or just the needs, right? We all share the same experience. It didn't matter what letter came after our name on a title. It mattered that we were all facing the same issues, and we're like, hey, let's fix this problem. And we've done some amazing stuff. So when we talk about this bipartisan effort, it's really about those friendships that you build, because then they respect you, and they're like, you know what? If Luz says this is important for her constituency, then I want to help Luz. Maybe it's not for my district, but my vote is not going to kill my district. I'll support you. We've taken some of those positions. I'm like, if my constituents go, because that's not even going to matter in my area, but let me support the senator so she gets her stuff that matters in her district out. And if that means that I may be like the only Democrat voting with Republicans, so what? It was the right thing to do, and for that policy that means so much for someone that I have respect for, and for that community, even though it's not my district, I'll do it.
Oh, that's great. All right, we are sadly out of time. I think we could probably go for a good long time. A lot of wonderful questions for these women. I do want to say, I think on behalf of all of us, I grew up with a strong, deep hope and belief in civic affairs and the public system, which has been slowly eroded away in the last, not just 2 years, but in the last many years. And I just want to tell you that as just a human being sitting there, not just as a moderator, you 4 were all just so remarkable and inspiring. And you really make politics look good. So thank you. I think I speak for all of us when I say that if there was just more of the collective this at a lot of different tables, we would all be a lot better off. So that's where you all fit in. It's all of us, our job to do 2 things, to decide if we are going to participate in this process ourselves. But I also think Senator Escamilla pointed out something really well. all of us might not be inclined to run for office, and I loved your story of your girlfriends supporting you. I think all of us as women can find a way to amplify the voices of the women who feel that they are capable and able to do it. So I think my takeaway from all of this is that I hope everyone in this room can make a decision that they are either going to find a way that they will actively participate or find a way that they will actively support and amplify the voices of the women who feel like they can. So thank you. Thank you very much. We've got a few minutes. Yeah, do you want to have a question? I was going to say we've got a few minutes, so I'm just going to let people ask questions until, if people need to leave to get to their next class, go. But we'll just use up this 10-minute time. Okay, does that make sense? Go ahead. Yeah, what are your... Yeah, is there one of you that wants to speak to that? Please, go for it.
You're a brave one.
She's taken one for the team.
So I have had a lot of constituents angry about this very issue, and I have been angry myself about this very issue. Whoops, I tipped my water. One thing I want to say is that if it weren't for these ballot initiatives, we wouldn't have medical marijuana now. We wouldn't have Medicaid being expanded to the extent that it is now. And so as small of a good thing, even if it doesn't make you feel that much better, if it weren't for the efforts that were done by the voters and by the people who were going door to door and knocking, we would not have these things in place. So really, it made a huge difference and a huge impact. It really did. And, oh, sorry, I also just wanted to say that no matter how a law is passed, whether it's passed by any of us or through the initiative process, that law is subject to being changed, as we've intimated, right? There are very few laws, I don't know if there's any, that have never been changed. And so when an initiative is first written, it's usually several years before it actually gets onto the ballot, right? And by that point, there's more eyes on it. There's things that that can be seen that maybe need to be changed, and so I would just expect that to have even if you talked, to listening to these good senators and representatives, they have bills that were near and dear to their heart that they took 1 to 2 years working on changing, working with stakeholders to get correct. An initiative process doesn't go through that vetting process from the beginning, right? And so then after it's passed, or after it's on the ballot, the question, the wording is there, it starts to go through that process. And so I can see why it's frustrating and upsetting, but I personally, and I always blurt things out, and then I don't know if it's the right thing or not, but I think that we have a much better medical marijuana bill out there right now than what was on the ballot. There are things that I wish were added to it. I actually had a bill that I never made it out of committee that would have added autoimmune disorders to the list of qualifying conditions. I think there's things that I think should be in there that aren't in there, but I also think that it's a better bill and that we can work with it and change it and get it to a point where it's even better. And then with Medicaid expansion, I actually was one of 4 Republicans that voted for Representative Ward's bill that was the full Medicaid expansion, but it needed to be funded differently. It really just did. And so there had to be changes. And there are, I don't have time now, but there are some really good things about, I was really frustrated with that Medicaid expansion, the changes, but there are some things that are better about what Utah is doing with that bill now than going along with what the federal government would have had us do at 138%. And I'll just say one of them, but there's a 12-month grace period for people who were on Medicaid, which means that they won't just fall off a cliff if they get a job that pays them better. Because if you go with the federal government's version, as soon as you make $1 more, you are cut off. But this, with Utah's version, you have 12 months, grace period for that, and I think that's really important.
We'll do one more, and then I think we probably do need to,
And just before, because let me just give a different perspective, because I think this is a very important question. So one, I think where people are frustrated is what was difficult, and I won't speak for every Democrat, but I think our caucuses in general was, why doing this, for example, in the medical cannabis 2 weeks later, and there was a time frame situation and a legal situation why. But I think that's where the voters were so upset, that they went through this lengthy process to get it on the ballot. And this issue, so medical cannabis, we discussed them for 7 years. I was in every single committee, so this is not an issue that was never discussed before. I'll start there. At length, I don't know that we've ever talked about more about one issue than medical cannabis in the state legislature. Hearings, yeah, at least in the Senate, you're right. So, I don't know that I agree completely with that perspective. So I think what needs to happen, what we learn is that that we as a state need to define maybe parameters of saying, and some states have done this where they say, yeah, if an initiative passes and you give them at least a year, or you can change certain things within the policy but not the intent. I mean, you can frame some of those pieces, and we don't have that. I think that's what is needed to happen, because not every initiative is perfect, but the people voted for that. Now, to say, well, the people didn't know what they were voting for, to me, that's insulting, because I'm like, well, they're reading, they can read. But they may just have read the first paragraph, right? I mean, so the reality is we are now responsible then to balance the budget. So if we go back to the Medicaid piece, right, we were missing a bunch of money that was available. Why would we not use that money? We should not tie our hands from a budget perspective to use money, but you should not be completely removing the intent. I mean, that's an example. Medical cannabis intent again. So I think you can always make it better, and there's always the next year that we're just saying we will come back next year and fix it again. But to me, that I think that maybe just to say that, I don't know that everybody was trying to say, oh, all the voters from Utah didn't know what they were doing. But at the same time, at one point you have to say, well, where do we draw the line? Where if you go through a process and it goes to the ballot and it gets voted for, you respect that intent. And that's where I don't know that we have a definition yet, and that should be defined sooner than later, I think.
Okay, that's perfect. I'm so sorry. We are going to have to cut it up. But the good news is the legislature is not in session, so this is your window to talk to them. So I think they're happy to go out into the hallway, and if you do have a question that we weren't able to get to, I'm sure these lovely women would be happy to hear it. Thank you for coming.